Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Oh, the ballet. I love the ballet so much. It is a style of dance that is deep and rich in imagination, beauty, and history. There are so many famous ballets that it's hard to choose a favorite. Not for me. My favorite is the Nutcracker. Hands down, I've gone to it almost every year since I was 5. Love the Nutcracker! Love the Nutcracker. And plus, when I think of Christmas, I think of cookies, Santa, presents, trees, and the Nutcracker. And the music is truly one in a century outstanding. But do you know how exactly it became one of the most beloved and popular ballets in America? That would be due to a prima ballerina named Maria Tallchief. Let's get started. Before I get into it, buckle up. Herstory, there's so much in it, and it's going to be long. As you know, I don't gloss over things. And the fact that a lot of these people gloss over some things, I was not okay with. So, buckle up. Elizabeth Mary Tallchief was born on January 24th, 1925 in Fairfax, Oklahoma. Her mother was Ruth Porter. She was of Scottish-Irish heritage, and she met Mary's father, Alexander Joseph Tallchief, who was a widower while visiting her sister, who was the cook and housekeeper for Alexander's mother. This man was a 6'2", full-blooded Osage Indian and a member of the Osage Nation. The Osage are a Midwestern American tribe of the Great Plains and are descendants of indigenous peoples' cultures dating back thousands of years. The tribe developed in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys around 700 BC and migrated west after the 17th century, settling near the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. In the 19th century, the Osage were forced out of their homeland by the United States and had to move into the Indian Territory. That was essentially land the government set aside to force the indigenous peoples in so they could take over. And just so you know, yes, the Indian Territory is essentially the ending point of the Trail of Tears. We love that part. These set-aside lands would later become Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota, Colorado, and Missouri, but the majority of the land would later form Oklahoma. Awesomely, Mary's great-grandfather on her dad's side, Peter Bigheart, love that name, helped negotiate the Osage oil revenues when oil was found on the Osage's land that was enriching the hell out of the nation. So as a result, her father grew up rich and never worked a day in his life. So when Mary was born, she too grew up on the reservation. She talks about growing up on the reservation as, quote, "When Daddy was a boy, oil was discovered on Osage land, and overnight the tribe became rich. As a young girl growing up on the Osage reservation in Fairfax, Oklahoma, I felt my father owned the town. He had property everywhere. The local movie theater on Main Street and the pool hall opposite belonged to him. Our 10-room terracotta brick house stood high on a hill overlooking the reservation." End quote. Yep, that's what oil money will get you. Her father was previously married to a German immigrant, and 3 children came from that marriage. So in turn, Mary had 3 step-siblings. Francis, born May 11th, 1912, Alexander Joseph Tallchief Jr., born February 13th, 1915, and Thomas, born February 2nd, 1919. With the marriage to Ruth, along with Mary, they also had 3 children. Gerald, born September 13th, 1922, Mary, and then finally, Marjorie Lewis, born October 19th, 1926. Now, her siblings are a doozy. Thomas played football for the University of Oklahoma, then was drafted to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Marjorie also became a ballerina in her own right, and the 2 sisters were best friends. And Gerald was unfortunately injured as a child by getting kicked in the head by a horse. Unfortunately, he never got normal brain function again. These families spent the summers in Colorado Springs, Colorado to get away from the Oklahoma heat, and it is here where Mary would have her first ballet lesson. Now, though her family's life seemed perfect on the outside, her father was unfortunately a binge drinker and her parents often fought about money. But her mother was determined to give her girls their dreams. See, when Ruth was a child, she dreamed about becoming a performer, but her family couldn't afford music or dance lessons. And she was determined that that would not be the case for her daughters. Mary, who was called Betty Mary by her friends and family, was enrolled in summer ballet classes in Colorado Springs in 1928 at the age of 3. Her and other family members also performed at rodeos and other events in the local area. Mary was also gifted at the piano and had a great voice. She studied the piano and seriously thought about becoming a concert pianist, but alas, the ballet bug just bitten her, and it bit her hard. In 1930, Mrs. Sabin, a ballet teacher in Tulsa, Oklahoma, visited Fairfax looking for new students and took on Mary and her sister. However, Mary would later reflect on this instructor and say, quote, "She was a wretched instructor who never taught the basics, and it's a miracle I wasn't permanently harmed," end quote. And saying she was wretched, to me, is an understatement. For example, on top of just not teaching the fundamentals, which if any of you have taken ballet, and I don't know what girl on this planet has not taken ballet at some point in her childhood by under the age of 5, you know that the fundamentals, that is the first thing you learn. First position is the first thing you learn. I did ballet, here's a picture of me. Yes, I was freaking good as heck. Anyway, she put Mary on point not long after she joined the school. Now you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal of that? To put this into perspective, for a girl to go into point, meaning they start learning to dance in those infamous point shoes, which if you did not know, they literally dance on the tip of their toes in point shoes. I learned that once a few years ago and I was all like, I have a whole new respect for them. I already had respect for point ballet dancers because that just, my own feet hurt, but that girl needs to be at least 11 years old. Mary was 5. Way too young to be on point without causing serious injury. Also at the age of 5, she was enrolled at the Sacred Heart Catholic School. They were so impressed with her reading ability that the teachers allowed her to skip the first 2 grade levels of reading. Honestly, that sounds like me. By age 5, I was eating up novels, like 200 plus page novels by age 5. Between piano, ballet, and school, Mary had very little time for the outdoors, and she loved the outdoors. She said she loved to wander around her family's big front yard and go on hunts for arrowheads in the grass of their summer cottage. Wanting to give her daughters the best chance to achieve their dancing and performing dreams, in 1933, when Mary was 8, Ruth moved the family to Los Angeles, California to get their daughters into Hollywood musicals. The day they arrived, Ruth took her daughters to a drugstore for snacks and drinks. She then started a conversation with the clerk of the store and asked if he knew of any good dancing teachers in the area. He recommended Ernest Belcher, father of Marjorie Champion, a dancer and actress who at the age of 14 was hired as a dance model for Disney's first ever Disney princess film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Like, you know the scene where Snow and the dwarves are having a big old party? That's her. Because the whole technology of the dancing there, why it looks so real, was they essentially copied a dancer and put it into the computers. That was her. Nuts! Mary would later say about this experience, quote, "An anonymous man in an unfamiliar town decided our fate with those few words," end quote. And that's an understatement. Being in California, the state put Mary back into her average grade for her age, but did put her in an opportunity class, which basically is a program for advanced learners. And Mary would say even in this special class, she was still way ahead of her peers. When she started classes with Ernest, she basically had to go back to the basics, since, her last teacher was that bad. And most importantly, she was thankfully taken off of pointe shoes. Ernest was a great teacher and taught her very, very well. While dancing with Ernest, she also took up tap dancing, Spanish dancing, and freaking acrobatics, but found tumbling hard and quit. But later, she would put those skills to very good use. The family moves to Beverly Hills for better education. Mary was enrolled at Beverly Vista School, and unfortunately, Mary was bullied there. She described it as painful with the discrimination, and she had to start spelling her last name, Tallchief, into one word, Tallchief. In 1937, at the age of 12, Mary began to work with innovative choreographer Bratislava Nijinská, a Russian ballet dancer of Polish origin who came from a family of traveling and professional dancers and had previously worked for Sergei Diaghilev's Ballets Russes, a famous traveling ballet company that performed all over Europe and North and South America from 1909 to 1929, but never performed in Russia because there were things going on there. In the 20 years they were performing, the company performed 71 ballets. She had recently opened her own studio in LA, and Mary described her as, quote, was a personification of what ballet was all about. I looked at her and I knew this was what I wanted to do, end quote. And Mary did exactly that. See, Bratislava was one of the first ballet performers with a strong sense of discipline and believed that being a ballerina was a full-time task. Quote, we didn't concentrate only for an hour and a half a day. We lived it. Before Nijinská, I liked ballet, but believed that I was destined to become a concert pianist. Now my goal was different, end quote. Mary threw herself into being a ballerina and decided to devote her life to ballet, saying, quote, being a ballerina is like being a 5-star general, end quote. And her devotion would pay off greatly. By age 15, Mary decided to be in 3 short ballets that were staged by Bratislava in the famed amphitheater, the Hollywood Bowl. Mary was hoping for the lead role, but instead was put into the Corps de Ballet, or the ballet name for a group of dancers. For example, think Waltz of the Flowers and the Nutcracker. Now, this was a bit of a slap in the face for Mary because the dancers in a Corps de Ballet are dancers that are not principal professional dancers or soloists, a level down from principal and a level above Corps de Ballet dancers. And Mary was devastated, hurt, and humiliated. But after what I'm assuming was a very much come to Jesus pep talk with her mother, she decided to dedicate herself to prove herself to Bratislava and soon worked her way into a leading part in Chopin Concerto. Mary got more instruction from many different, very distinguished teachers when they would visit Los Angeles, and that just made Mary even better. For example, when famed soloist ballerina Mia Slavinska visited LA, she took a liking to Mary and arranged an audition with Sergei Deneb, who was the director of the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, which was very big at the time. He was impressed by her, but nothing came of it. Lips. Red again. After graduating from Beverly Hills High School in 1942, Mary wanted to go to college, but her father was against it, saying, quote, I've paid for lessons all your life. Now it's time for you to find a job. Don't blame you, Daddy. Ballet's expensive as hell. That summer, Russian prima ballerina, teacher, and family friend Tatiana Ryabunchinska asked her if she wanted to go to New York City. Mary accepted, and in that same year, at the young age of 17, Mary went to the Big Apple. Once there, she looked up Sergei, called the company, and his secretary told her that there was no room for her. But a few days later called her back and said that there was a spot for her after all. When Mary got there, Sergei actually didn't remember her, but Mary had something he needed, a passport. See, many of his dancers were Russian immigrants, basically people who immigrated for political or social reasons, and they lacked passports, and the troupe had a Canadian tour coming up. On a combination of her talents and passport, she was taken into Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo as an apprentice, and her first performance was in Gate Princienne. If I mispronounced that, I'm sorry. After this tour, a dancer left the group because she became pregnant, and Mary was offered her place and a weekly salary of $40, or almost $700 in today's money, a week. $700 a week. How do I get that? Over the next 5 years, Mary performed in many ballets while with the company, and her performances received very positive reviews from top dance critics at the time. As her career was taking off, her parents started to see that their daughter was very talented and could really succeed in ballet. Also, and this makes my blood boil, many tried to pressure Mary to change her last name to sound more Russian or European. Mary refused. Quote, "Tallchief was my name, and I was proud of it," end quote. But Ange de Milly, who was choreographing the ballet Rodeo, had a better idea. Use a modified version of her middle name. From this point on, Mary started to go by professionally as Maria Tallchief. So from this point on, I will be calling her Maria. One time while on tour, Maria saw her parents in Los Angeles. Her parents couldn't help but notice how frail their daughter appeared. With poor nutrition and all the stress from being on tour and her minor role in The Snow Maiden, she had lost a lot of weight. Her mother, Ruth, tried to persuade Maria to quit ballet and to go back to piano. But when Ruth saw a review of her daughter's most recent performance by America's top dance critic, John Martin, that said, quote, "Tallchief gave a stunning account of herself in Nijinsky's Chopin Concerto. She has an easy brilliance that smacks of authority rather than bravura," end quote, and predicted that Maria would be a big star in the near future. Ruth changed her mind. She saw that her daughter was achieving her dreams and she wasn't going to stop her. In the second year with the company, Maria got even bigger roles. She was a soloist in Le Beau Damu and the lead role in Ancient Russia, a ballet choreographed by Bratislava. In the spring of 1941, Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo hired one of the most influential ballet choreographers of the 20th century, George Balanchine. He and writer, impresario, art connoisseur, and philanthropist Lincoln Kirstein would in 1946 establish the Ballet Society that would later become the New York City Ballet. Lost my brain when I found that. George was hired to work on the company's newest production called Song of Norway, a Broadway musical choreographed by George. This would be a massive turning point for both George's and Maria's careers. For one, Maria was drawn to George from the first time she saw him. She described one of her first experiences with him. Quote, "When I saw what he had done, I was astonished. Everything seemed so simple yet perfect. An elegant ballet fell into place before my eyes," end quote. At first, she thought that George didn't notice her very much. Oh, was she wrong about that? I mean, A, look at her. B, watch her. And C, look at her. Look at this. Look at this. George assigned Maria a solo in Song of Norway, and on opening night, Maria was told that Prima Ballerina, teacher and Maria's idol, Alexandria Danilova, wanted to take Maria as her understudy. After the ballet's success, the company offered George a contract for the rest of the season, and he accepted it. Now, this is where I can emotionally relate to Maria because my own mother has done this. Sensing her daughter's fame was on the rise, Ruth demanded a raise and promotion for her daughter. Understandably, Maria was mortified by the move. I'm not naming any situations, but my mom has done things pretty dang similar to that. It's like, Mom. But Sergei either agreed or smartly gave in into her demands and increased Maria's salary to $50 or $872 a week and promoted her to soloist. The connection between Maria and George blossomed into romance. At least on George's side. See, Maria was very fond of George, praising him as a choreographic, that word is hard for my mouth, as a choreographical genius, and saw him as a courtly, sophisticated friend. Quote, "It never occurred to me that there was anything more than dancing on his mind. It would have been preposterous to think there was anything personal," end quote. So when George asked her to marry him, you can't imagine the surprise and shock. She described the proposal in the summer of 1945 after an LA performance, and they are alone in a car before George said, quote, "Maria, I would like you to become my wife." I almost fell out of my seat and was unable to respond. I replied, "But George, I'm not sure I love you. I feel I hardly know you," end quote. He said it didn't matter, and if the marriage lasted only a few years, he was fine with it. And after one day to think it over, she agreed to marry him. Alright, whatever. Unfortunately, and very understandably, her parents didn't like this at all. They opposed the engagement. Ruth even said, "I've never heard of anything more idiotic. What's wrong with you?" End quote. Don't blame her. What the heck is wrong with her? But they would marry on August 16th, 1946, when Maria was 21 and George was 42, and Maria was his third wife. Understandably, her parents didn't attend the ceremony, and I would assume that they were opposed of this engagement and marriage also because of the 20 years age gap. Can't really blame them there. Maria described the marriage as unusual. Quote, "Passion and romance didn't play a big part in our married life. We saved our emotions for the classroom," end quote. But she described George as a warm, affectionate, and loving husband. Maria left Ballet Russet de Monte Carlo in 1947 when her contract expired. Once she left, she joined George, who was a guest choreographer at the Paris Opera Ballet in France, to save the troupe. Once Maria got there, she was immediately put to work with roles in, I'm going to try to pronounce this as best as I can, Le Baiser de la Fée. Le Baiser de la Fée. Tried my best. And Apollo. Despite needing to learn a more difficult role after the dancer pulled out of the show, this show was a success. Even though Maria's colleagues didn't appreciate her presence, and I kid you not, that was what I actually read. They didn't appreciate her presence. Could you be any more prissy French? The French media loved and was fascinated by Maria's talent, but even more with her background. One of the front pages of a magazine said, "The daughter of the great Indian chief dances at the opera." Another read, "Red skin dances at the opera for the King of Sweden." Seriously? That whole context is just really messed up. When Maria performed with the Paris Opera Ballet, that made Maria, in the company's 108 years, the first American to perform with the troupe. Take that, you little prissies who's offended with my presence. After 6 months in Paris, Maria and George returned to New York. When they returned to New York, the New York City Ballet opened in 1948, and Maria was one of the first stars of the company, and with that, became the first prima ballerina of not only the New York City Ballet, which she would hold this title for the next 13 years, but also the first prima ballerina in America. And she's an Indian! Boom! George truly revolutionized ballet. He did this by creating roles that demanded speed, athleticism, and more aggressive dancing like nothing before, and Maria was well suited for this vision. Maria was known for her dazzling audiences with her energy, speed, and fire. She exhibited both thrilling and electrifying passion and technicality. She combined precise, and I mean precise, footwork with athleticism. See, Maria wasn't just a dancer, she was an artist. According to Time, Maria was also, quote, "a master in the perfect pause, the moment of stillness, allowing the audience and the narrative to keep pace with the choreography," end quote. With her great talent, George created many roles specifically for Maria. She performed in many amazing roles, like in The Four Temperaments in 1946 and Symphonie Concertante in 1947. But her leading role in The Firebird in 1949 would skyrocket her to the top of the ballet world and made her an international star. One critic said about her performance, quote, "She careened, she shimmered, she glorified in speed and airy freedom," end quote. She was asked to perform as many as 8 times a week. In 1952, the marriage between Maria and George was annulled because they became attracted to other people. And in that same year, Maria would marry a pilot for a private charter airline.
Elmerza Natirbuff.
What? Elmerza Natirbuff. That is the weirdest name I've seen in a while. Though the marriage failed, the two worked well together professionally, and George continued to put Maria into starring lead roles. Most notably in George's revision of Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker in 1954. Called George Balanchine's The Nutcracker, Maria was given the famous role of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and I think her performance is best summed up by critic Walter Terry. Quote, Maria Tallchief as the Sugar Plum Fairy is herself a creature of magic, electrifying us with her brilliance, enchanting us with her radiance of being. Does she have any equals anywhere inside or outside of fairyland? While watching her in the Nutcracker, one is tempted to doubt it. End quote. At the time of this performance, the Nutcracker wasn't well known or very popular outside of Russia. And if there is anything you should know about the role of the Sugar Plum Fairy in the Nutcracker, is that it is one of the hardest classical ballet roles ever made. Called Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy and choreographed by Lev Lavinov, the first Sugar Plum Fairy was Italian Prima Ballerina Antonietta Dellera in 1892. We don't know the original version of the Sugar Plum dance, but there have been several versions of the Nutcracker that doesn't even have the Sugar Plum Fairy. However, in the modern version of the ballet, it's impossible to think of the Nutcracker without the Sugar Plum Fairy. But luckily, the Sugar Plum Fairy has been a staple of the performance since 1919. What makes George's version different is the leading roles of Clara. In his version, her name is Mary, and the Nutcracker / Prince are danced by children instead of adults, which takes away the romantic aspect of the original Nutcracker. And in Act 2, the Prince and Mary basically sit out all of Act 2 and watch the other dancers perform for them. That's where you get all of these other amazing dances. When Maria performed the dance, it was this version of the ballet that took the ballet from obscurity into an annual Christmas classic, and is the ballet industry's most reliable box office draw, and is the most popular version of the Russian ballet, and is practically worshipped in America. And I will say, I can't move on without mentioning this. My favorite movie version of the Nutcracker is Barbie as the Nutcracker. I'm sorry, I love this stuff. The animation is crap, but that was what makes it awesome. It's 2000 crap animation. It's so good. Other leading roles Maria played that put her into the ballerina history books are her as Odette and Odile, aka the White and Black Swan in Swan Lake in 1951, and Eurydice in Orpheus in 1948. With Maria's fiery and athletic performances, it helped establish and propel George as the 20th century's most influential and prominent choreographer. Her role as the Black Swan in Swan Lake was so infamous that on November 29th, 1962, she and her partner performed for former President Dwight D. Eisenhower and current President John F. Kennedy for the An American Pageant of the Arts event that raised funds for the National Cultural Center that began under Eisenhower's administration and encouraged under Kennedy's. I mean, just look how beautiful this is. Oh my God, it's just amazing. And her arms? Damn! Maria stayed with the New York City Ballet till February 1960, but she took time off to be a guest performer with other companies like the San Francisco Ballet, Chicago Opera Ballet, Royal Danish Ballet in Denmark, and the Hamburg Ballet in Germany, among others. In the year 1954 to 55, with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, she was paid $2,000 a week, or $22,829 in today's money. This is supposedly the highest salary ever paid to a dancer at this time. She did her last performance in 1958 in the lead role of George's Gounod Symphony because she had to take leave to have her first child. By this time, she had divorced Elmerza and had met businessman Henry D. Buzz Passion Jr. in 1955. They got married that next year in 1956 and had their first and Maria's only child, Elise Maria Passion, in January of 1958. She would later go on to become an award-winning poet and executive director of of the Poetry Society of America. With the marriage to Buzz, Maria gained a stepdaughter, Margaret Wright. After leaving the NYCB, Maria joined the American Ballet Theater in 1960 and became their first guest dancer as a prima ballerina. Her time with the American Ballet Theater, she showed how much she loved the dramatic instead of the abstract ballet roles, such as in the role of Miss Julie in Birgit Kohlberg's Miss Julie and the melancholy heroine of Anthony Tudor's Jardinoc's Lilas. Maria also appeared in TV shows, such as The Ed Sullivan Show. She played a Russian ballerina by the name of Anna Pavlova in the 1952 Technicolor musical Million Dollar Mermaid, starring next to Esther Williams.
All my life I've wanted to be able to dance like you. You've studied for the ballet? Yes. My dear, don't ever think that your studies have been in vain. Your act is wonderful.
She was Rudolf Nurayev's chosen partner for his broadcasted American debut in 1962, and her last performance on television was in 1966 on the Bell Telephone Hour. One of her last stage performances was as the lead role of Cinderella in Peter Van Dyke's Cinderella in 1966, where after she retired from dancing, not wanting to dance beyond her prime. During her career, she danced all throughout Europe, South America, Russia, and Japan, and made several guest appearances with several symphony orchestras. Throughout her career, Maria remained very close to her Osage heritage. Her success was celebrated by the Osage Nation tribe by giving her the title Princess Wa Tx the Thamba, meaning the woman of two standards, in 1953. And if I mispronounced that, I'm sorry. I can't find the exact pronunciation of that name. It's a beautiful name. And the Oklahoma State Senate honored Maria by declaring June 19th, 1953, Maria Tallchief Day. She appeared on the cover of the October 11th, 1954 issue of Newsweek magazine that focused on her $2,000 a week salary, and they declared her the highest paid ballerina in the world. After her retirement, she moved to Chicago to stay with her husband. She became the artistic director of the Chicago Lyric Opera Ballet from 1973 to 1979, and in 1974, she founded the Lyric Opera's Ballet School, where she taught the Balanchine ballet technique. In 1981, with her sister Marjorie, Maria founded the Chicago City Ballet, and Mary served as the artistic director till it shut down in 1987. Though the school shut down, the Chicago Tribune championed her by saying she was a force in the history of Chicago dance and increased the popularity of dance in the city. Maria is one of 4 Indian ballerinas depicted in Flight of Spirits, a mural in the Oklahoma Capitol building. She is one of the life-size bronze statues titled The 5 Moons at the Tulsa Historical Society. In 1996, Maria received a Kennedy Center honor for lifetime achievements. Her biography states that Maria was, quote, both the inspiration and the living expression of the best the United States has given the world. Her individualism and her genius came together to create one of the most vital and beautiful chapters in the history of American dance, end quote. She released her autobiography, Maria Tallchief, America's Prima Ballerina, that next year in 1997. Maria was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1996, received the National Medal for the Arts in 1999 by the National Endowment of the Arts, was named Woman of the Year twice by the Washington Press Club. In 2011, she received the Chicago History Museum's Making History Award for Distinction in Performing Arts. Unfortunately, in December of 2012, Maria broke her hip and she had to have surgery. I don't know exactly how she broke her hip. Elizabeth Mary Maria Tallchief died on April 11, 2013 at a hospital in Chicago, Illinois from complications of her hip injury at the age of 88. Maria is considered to be America's first prima ballerina and the first Native American to hold that title and rank. She was called by the New York Times one of America's most brilliant American ballerinas of the 20th century. And to quote artistic director of the Joffrey Ballet, Ashley Weeder, who met Maria several times, Maria, quote, paved the way for dancers who were not in the traditional mold of ballet. She was crucial in breaking the stigma, End quote. She is credited with breaking down the ethnic barriers and was one of the first Americans to truly flourish in the ballet field that was long dominated by the Russians and Europeans. She was inducted into the National Native American Hall of Fame in 2018. On November 13th, 2020, Google did a doodle in honor of her. She is currently being honored on an American Woman Quarter. This quarter shows her on the reverse side of George Washington. She is also on the 2023 Sacagawea dollar, also known as the Golden Dollar. In an interview on her long career with George and her lead roles, she said, quote, "I was in the middle of magic, in the presence of genius, and thank God I knew it." There you go. Now you know who the first prima ballerina in America was. A Native American woman that helped skyrocket what I think encompasses Christmas, the Nutcracker. I had too much fun researching her story, and plus I listened to the Nutcracker the entire time. Before I go, this is my last video of 2023. I don't know where this year went, and I can't believe I've been doing this for almost a year now. I cannot thank you guys enough for commenting, subscribing, and sharing and liking all of these videos. I truly do love doing this, and I want to continue doing this, and I just cannot thank you guys enough. I don't know, I just am amazed that I'm even doing this right now. If you learned something today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. And what is your favorite ballet? Mine is obviously the Nutcracker, but I also do love Swan Lake. But the Nutcracker for me, hands down the best ballet there is. I will be back either the 2nd or 3rd week of January. But until then, do not be well behaved. You just might make herstory. Have a fun, magical Christmas, Kwanzaa, whatever holiday you celebrate, and Happy New Year's, everybody. See you next year.
Of course. The princess has been with us all along.